Welcome back to the deep dive. I have to say, I am genuinely excited about where we are going today. Usually when we prep for these, we have these massive piles of articles, research papers, sometimes entire books to sift through. It can be a little overwhelming.
It can.
But today is different.
It is different. It's deceptively simple.
Exactly. That's the perfect word. We're working from what is essentially a single timeline infographic.
Yeah.
And on the surface, it just looks like a list of names and dates. But the more I looked at it, the more I realized this isn't just a list. This is a story. It's a survival story.
That is the perfect way to frame it.
It's a story of how humanity figured out how to cut someone open, and this is the important part, keep them alive afterward.
Yeah, right.
We are looking at the chronology of asepsis and surgical safety, but really what we're talking about is the evolution of the operating theater, or OT, safety.
It really is. And you're right to call it a survival story. Because if you look at the source material, this timeline captures a really profound shift in human history. We are tracing a journey from pure intuition, guessing, essentially, to rigorous, hard-won science.
And the timeline is so stark. We are starting all the way back in 550 BC.
Ancient history, literal ancient history.
And we are ending with Joseph Lister in the late 19th century. And in between those 2 points, there is this invisible war being fought.
Yes.
A war against enemies we couldn't even see for most of that time.
That's the key phrase right there, the invisible war. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the mission of this deep dive isn't just to, memorize some dates and names.
Right.
It's to understand how we learned to see the invisible. We are going to trace the evolution of OT safety, step by agonizing step.
Okay, so just to give everyone a roadmap of where we are going, here are the key markers on our timeline today. We've got the ancient Greeks around 550 BC. Then we move to the big man himself, Hippocrates. Then we have a bit of a jump, a huge jump, to Leeuwenhoek. Then Ignaz Semmelweis, a truly tragic figure, I might add. Then Pasteur, and finally, Joseph Lister.
It sounds like a seemingly random collection of people across thousands of years.
It really does. A philosopher, a lens grinder, a couple of doctors, a chemist. It sounds like the setup to a bad joke.
Right.
But when you put them in this order on this specific infographic, something just clicks into place.
It stops being a list of biographies and becomes a genealogy of an idea. The idea that safety isn't just about being careful, it's about understanding the very environment you're working in.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want to start right at the beginning, the very top of the timeline, 550 BC.
The beginning of our journey.
The source material identifies this simply as Greek cloth wounds.
Short, simple, but wow, incredibly significant.
Right. So paint the picture for us. We are in ancient Greece, 550 BC, pre-microscope, pre-germ theory, pre-everything, really.
Pretty much.
Someone gets slashed in battle or maybe suffers a bad farming accident, and the state-of-the-art safety protocol is a piece of cloth.
It sounds almost too basic to mention, doesn't it? But you have to think about what that represents. You have to contextualize it. Before you decide to use a clean cloth, what's the alternative? What acts as the bandage?
I assume whatever is lying around. Leaves, maybe mud.
Exactly. Or nothing at all. Just leaving the wound open to the air, the dust, the flies.
Which I imagine was a death sentence most of the time.
More often than not, yes. Infection, what they would have called festering, was just an accepted part of getting hurt. So the decision to apply a dry, woven cloth to a wound is actually a massive cognitive leap. It is the first instance we have of a physical barrier.
A barrier against what, though? That's what I find so fascinating about this early stage. They didn't know about bacteria. They didn't know about viruses.
No, they didn't. But humans are observant creatures. We are pattern-seeking machines. They almost certainly observed that wounds covered with a clean cloth healed better than those that were packed with mud or just left exposed.
So it's the birth of the concept that the outside is dangerous to the inside?
That's it. That's the core idea. They didn't know what the danger was. You're right. They probably thought it was bad air or miasma or even some kind of evil spirit. But they knew that stuff getting into the wound was bad.
It's pure intuition.
Precisely. It's the most primitive form of what we now call asepsis, keeping the bad stuff out. Even if you don't know the bad stuff is microscopic bugs, you know that keeping the literal dirt out helps.
It creates a controlled environment in a very, very rudimentary way.
It does. And some specific texts from that era even suggest a preference for linen over wool.
Oh, that's interesting. Why is that?
Well, think about it. What's wool like? It's scratchy, it sheds fibers, it traps a lot of dirt. Linen is smoother, it's cleaner. So even 2,500 years ago, they were making these really specific, informed choices about the quality of the barrier.
So if we are looking at the evolution of OT safety, step one is shield the wound, just build a wall.
Correct. And it's a passive defense. You aren't attacking the infection, you were just trying to build a little fort around the injury.
Which brings us to our next marker. We're moving forward now to Hippocrates. The name everyone knows, the Hippocratic Oath and all that.
The father of medicine, as they say.
But the timeline highlights something very specific here. It doesn't mention the oath. It says wine and boiled water.
Yes. Now, this is a massive leap forward from just a dry cloth.
Okay, let's talk about the wine first. I feel like there's a joke in there somewhere about doctors needing a drink after a long surgery. But I'm guessing that's not what this was for.
Not quite. Though I'm sure pain management was certainly an issue back then.
Right.
No, Hippocrates using wine to clean wounds is a fascinating example of getting the right answer for the wrong reason, or at least for a purely intuitive reason.
Because wine contains alcohol.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Chemically speaking, wine is a mild antiseptic.
But he wouldn't have known that, right? He didn't know about chemical structures or ethanol or anything like that.
Absolutely not. But think about the properties of wine in the ancient world. It's one of the few liquids that doesn't spoil quickly. Milk goes bad in a day. Water from a stagnant pond smells and tastes awful.
But wine keeps.
Wine keeps. So the logic, and you can sort of follow it, is if this liquid resists rotting, maybe it will stop a leg from rotting.
It's like sympathetic magic meets keen observation.
That's a great way to put it. And there's another factor, I think, which is the sting.
The sting.
When you pour wine on a cut, it hurts.
Yeah, alcohol on a raw wound is not pleasant.
But in the pre-scientific mind, sensation often equals action. If it stings, it feels like it's doing something. It's fighting the corruption in the wound.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Unlike the cloth, which just sat there passively, the wine was interacting with the wound. It felt active. It felt like medicine.
And then we have the second part of the Hippocratic method mentioned here, boiled water. This one really stood out to me because it seems so mundane.
It seems mundane to us because we have kettles and gas stoves and we can do it in 2 minutes. But why is it significant in 400 BC?
Well, because boiling water takes real effort. You have to gather wood, build a fire, wait for the water to boil, then wait for it to cool down so you don't scald the patient.
Exactly.
It's so much easier to just grab a bucket of water from the nearest river or the well.
That is the million-dollar question. Why go through all that trouble? It implies a cost-benefit analysis was made.
If they were doing it, they must have seen better results.
Precisely. They didn't know about waterborne pathogens. They had no idea that cholera or dysentery or 1,000 other nasty things lived in that river water. But they likely noticed a correlation.
And correlation is the mother of ancient science.
It is. Maybe they realized that people who drank tea or broths things made with boiled water got sick less often than those drinking straight from the stream. Or, maybe more directly, they noticed that wounds washed with river water tended to fester, while wounds washed with, for want of a better word, cooked water stayed cleaner.
Cooked water. I like that phrasing. It implies that raw water is dangerous.
And in a way, it is. This is the first time we see the concept of sanitization entering the picture.
Sanitization, that's a big word for 400 BC.
It is, but look at the shift. 550 BC was a barrier just covering up. Hippocrates is actively cleansing. He is trying to change the environment of the wound itself. He is introducing agents wine and boiled water to create a safer state.
So if we're tracking our evolution, we've gone from cover it up to clean it out.
Exactly. But there is still a massive problem. A problem that stalls any real progress for centuries and centuries.
And what's that?
They are fighting a ghost. Hippocrates is pouring wine on a wound to fight. What exactly? Bad air, miasma, evil spirits.
They know that it works sometimes, but they have absolutely no idea why it works. They are fighting completely blind.
And because they're fighting blind, they can't improve. They can't refine the process. If you don't know it's bacteria, you don't know that you need to wash your hands before you pour the wine.
Or that the sponge you are using to apply the wine might be filthy.
Precisely. So it's hit or miss. And that is why the next name on our list is the turning point. It's the pivot upon which all of modern medicine turns.
We are jumping forward in time now, a huge jump, from 400 BC all the way to the 17th century. The timeline takes us to Antony van Leeuwenhoek.
The man with the lens.
And the source lists him simply as microscope. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but Leeuwenhoek wasn't a surgeon, right? He wasn't in the OT cutting people open.
No, not even close. He was a draper. He sold cloth for a living.
A cloth merchant. That brings us full circle back to the Greek cloth in a weird way.
It does, doesn't it?
So why is a cloth merchant on a timeline of surgical safety?
Because he was a perfectionist. He was obsessed with quality. He wanted to see the quality of his thread better than anyone else. He wanted to be able to count the threads per inch with absolute precision. So he started grinding his own lenses.
He was a hobbyist, really.
A very, very talented one. He managed to create these tiny, single-lens microscopes that were vastly superior to anything the scientists of the day had. They could magnify things up to 200, maybe even 270 times.
And one day, instead of looking at thread, he decided to look at a drop of pond water.
And that is the moment the world changed forever. He saw what he called the animalcules.
The little animals.
He saw a whole universe of moving, swimming, living things that no human eye had ever seen before. He looked at scrapings from his own teeth. He looked at blood. He looked at rainwater. And everywhere he looked, he saw this teeming, invisible life.
This raises an important question, though. Why does this matter for surgery? If I'm a doctor in the 1600s and you show me tiny bugs in water, I might think it's a neat curiosity, but do I connect that to the patient dying of infection on my table?
Not immediately, no. And that's the real tragedy of it. It took a long, long time to make that connection. But think about what Leeuwenhoek represents on this chart. Before him, the enemy was invisible. It was magic, or a curse, or just bad luck.
And after him, the enemy has a face. A tiny, wiggling face. But a face.
Exactly. Leeuwenhoek gave us the eyes. He provided the tool that would eventually allow us to see what we were fighting.
It's the difference between hearing a strange noise in a pitch-black room and turning on a flashlight.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
Hippocrates was swinging a sword in the pitch black, hoping to hit something with his wine and his boiled water. Leeuwenhoek didn't turn the lights on fully, not yet, but he lit a candle. He showed us that the air, the water, the surfaces all around us are teeming with life.
And that life isn't always friendly.
Not at all. But here's the frustration of this part of the story. We still hadn't connected the dots. We had the tool, the microscope, and we had an early method, the cleansing. But we didn't have the behavior.
Which brings us to the next section. And honestly, this is the part of the timeline that always makes me the most angry. It's just so tragic.
I have a feeling I know who you're talking about.
Ignaz Semmelweis.
Ah, yes. The savior of mothers.
And the source lists him next to just one word. Hand washing.
Such a simple word. It's something we teach toddlers to do before they have dinner.
But in the mid-1800s, this was revolutionary.
And
controversial.
it was incredibly controversial. You have to understand the context. We're in Vienna, the General Hospital. We're in the 1840s. Semmelweis is working in the maternity ward.
And women are dying.
In huge numbers, dying of something called childbed fever or puerperal fever.
Yep.
It was a horrific way to die. High fevers, excruciating pain, sepsis, a terrible, terrible thing.
And Semmelweis, he notices a pattern.
He's a data guy. He's a numbers guy. He looks at the data. There are 2 maternity clinics in the hospital. Clinic A is run by doctors and medical students. Clinic B is run by midwives.
And the logic at the time would be that the doctor's clinic is safer, right? I mean, they're the experts. They have the formal training.
You would think so. But the numbers told a completely different story. The death rate in the doctor's clinic was astronomical, sometimes as high as 18% or even 20%. 1 in 5 women.
1 in 5.
In the midwife's clinic, it was around 2%. It was around 2%.
That is a staggering difference. You were 10 times more likely to die if a doctor treated you than if a midwife did. That must have been terrifying for the patients.
Oh, it was. Women were literally begging on their knees not to be taken to the doctor's clinic. They said they preferred to give birth in the street.
So what was the difference? What did Semmelweis find?
He analyzed everything. He looked at ventilation, overcrowding, diet, even the way the priest rang the bell when someone died. He had a theory that maybe it was scaring the women to death, but he ruled it all out.
So what was left?
The daily routine. The medical students and the doctors, they started their day in the autopsy room.
Oh boy, here we go.
They were dissecting cadavers, the bodies of women who had died of this very disease, to learn about anatomy. And then they would walk straight upstairs to the delivery ward to examine expecting mothers.
Without washing their hands.
Without washing their hands. In fact, a stiff, bloody coat was often seen as a badge of honor.
What?
It showed you were a busy, hardworking doctor. It showed you were getting your hands dirty for the sake of science.
That is horrifying to modern ears. It's like a chef handling raw chicken and then going to make a fresh salad without rinsing off.
It's exactly like that. But worse, because they were transferring what Semmelweis called cadaverous particles directly into the birth canal of healthy women.
Cadaverous particles. So he didn't say bacteria or germs.
No, because Pasteur hadn't published his germ theory yet. This is key. Semmelweis was working on intuition and data alone. He could literally smell the death on their hands.
So what did he do?
He instituted a new rule, a very strict one. Before you touch a living patient, you must wash your hands in a solution of chlorinated lime.
Chlorine, that's strong stuff. That's not just soap and water.
He wanted to strip the smell away.
Yeah.
His logic was, if the smell was gone, the particles were gone.
And what happened to the death rate?
The results were instant, and they were undeniable. The death rate plummeted. It dropped from that 18% all the way down to under 2%. It matched the midwife's clinic.
So problem solved, right? Everyone cheered, Semmelweis got a statue, and hand washing became the norm immediately across Europe.
I wish that were the end of the story.
I know, it's not.
They virtually exiled him. The established medical community was deeply offended.
Offended by him saving lives.
They have to try and get inside their heads, the psychology of it. Semmelweis was essentially telling these gentlemen, these high-status, wealthy, educated individuals, that they were the dirty ones.
Right.
That they were the ones killing their own patients.
It wasn't the bad air or the patient's poor constitution or God's will. It was the doctor's hands.
That was a psychological leap they just couldn't make. Their entire self-image as gentlemen wouldn't allow it. A gentleman's hands are, by definition, clean.
That is just infuriating.
It is. But for our timeline, look at the shift in focus here. This is so crucial.
Okay, let's trace it. 550 BC, focus on the wound, cover it, Hippocrates, focus on the wound, clean it, Leuwenhoek, focus on the tool, see it, and now Semmelweis.
Semmelweis, focus on the doctor.
Yes, that is the critical evolution. Semmelweis introduced the human factor into the safety equation. He realized that the healer could be the vector of the disease.
Exactly. The protocol wasn't just about treating the patient anymore. It was about the behavior of the medical staff.
So what does this all mean? It means that for the very first time, safety is systemic. It involves the procedures of the people in the room, not just the tools or the wound itself.
Exactly. Even though he didn't have the scientific theory to back it up, he couldn't prove why it worked under a microscope. He changed the architecture of safety. He made it behavioral.
But the tragedy is that because he couldn't explain the why, the idea didn't stick immediately. He was ridiculed. He eventually had a complete mental breakdown, didn't he?
He did. He was committed to an asylum. And in the cruelest, most unbelievable irony, he died there of sepsis from an infected wound. The very infection he spent his life fighting.
That is just devastating. But it proves a point. To make safety a permanent change, you can't just have results. You need a theory. You need the proof. You need to be able to explain the why.
Right. And that leads us to the heavy hitters at the end of our timeline, the dynamic duo of the late 19th century who finally put all the pieces together. First up, Louis Pasteur.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, because now we're connecting all those dots.
And Pasteur wasn't a surgeon either.
He was a chemist, right, working for the wine industry.
Yes, and beer. He was essentially hired by the alcohol industry.
Yeah.
They wanted to know why their beer went bad and why their wine turned to vinegar.
Again with the wine. It always comes back to wine in this story.
It does seem to be a theme. But Pasteur proved something absolutely revolutionary. He proved that spoiling and fermentation weren't just some random chemical reaction happening on its own. It was caused by living organisms, by germs.
The germ theory of disease?
This is the bedrock. This is the foundation of modern medicine. Before this, the prevailing idea was spontaneous generation.
What's that exactly?
It was the idea that life just appeared, that if you left meat out, maggots just magically materialized from the decaying meat, or that mold just appeared out of thin air.
And Pasteur proved that they came from the outside world.
Yes. He used his famous swan neck flask experiment. He showed that if you boiled a broth to sterilize it, and you kept the dust out with that curved neck, the broth stayed sterile forever. But the second you let the dust in, it swarmed with microbial life.
So if we connect this to our bigger picture, Pasteur provided the grand narrative that explained everyone else on the timeline.
Exactly. He is the great unifier. Why did Hippocrates' boiled water work?
Because heat kills germs. Pasteur explained that.
Why did Semmelweis's chlorine hand wash work?
Because chlorine is an antiseptic that kills germs. Pasteur explained that.
What were those little animalcules that Leuwenhoek saw in his lens?
They were germs. Pasteur explained that.
He unified the timeline. He took all these disparate pieces, intuition from the Greeks, observation from Semmelweis, the tool from Leeuwenhoek, and he gave him a solid scientific framework.
He validated the intuition of the ancients and the heartbreaking observations of Semmelweis with cold, hard science. He proved that infection isn't a curse or bad luck, it's biology. It's an invasion by microscopic organisms.
And once you know it's an invasion, you can start planning a real counterattack.
Exactly. And that brings us to the final name on our list. The man who took Pasteur's theory and ran with it straight into the operating room, Joseph Lister.
The man who operationalized the theory.
Lister, as in Listerine.
The very same. Though he didn't actually invent the mouthwash, it was named in his honor as a tribute to his work.
Okay, so the source lists him with carbolic acid.
And this is the culmination of the entire timeline. This is where it all comes together.
So Pasteur says, hey guys, there are invisible bugs that are causing all these infections. And Lister says, okay, I'm going to nuke them.
That's a pretty good summary, actually. Lister was a British surgeon, and he was just tired of seeing his patients survive a complex surgery only to die of gangrene or sepsis a week later. It was heartbreaking work. You'd fix a compound fracture perfectly, but the patient dies anyway.
And he made the connection that it was the germs from the air falling into the open wound.
Right. He read Pasteur's work, and the light bulb went on, so he looked for a chemical weapon. And he found carbolic acid.
What was carbolic acid used for at the time? Not surgery, I'm guessing.
No, it was used to treat sewage.
Sewage?
Yes. In the city of Carlisle, they were spraying it on the sewage to keep the smell down and kill parasites. Lister's logic was, if it can sanitize sewage sludge, maybe it can sanitize an open wound.
That is a stark comparison, but desperate times call for desperate measures, I suppose.
And he didn't just wash the wound with it. He went all in. He soaked the surgical dressings in carbolic acid. He soaked his instruments in it. He even built a special machine, they called it the donkey engine, to spray a fine yellow mist of carbolic acid into the air of the operating theater while he was operating.
Wow. So he was working inside a literal cloud of acid. That can't have been pleasant for him or his staff.
Oh, it was awful. It burned their hands. It irritated their lungs. It made their eyes water constantly. It was a brutal environment to work in. But the results?
Undeniable.
Absolutely undeniable. Gangrene virtually disappeared from his wards. The post-operative mortality rates for amputations dropped from nearly 50% to around 15%. Survival rates skyrocketed.
This feels like the final step in our evolution. We started with a cloth, which is a physical barrier. We moved to wine, a mild antiseptic. Then hand washing, which is behavioral removal. And now with Lister, we have active, aggressive chemical sterilization.
We have the modern concept of the sterile field.
Mm-hmm.
Lister didn't just clean the wound, he tried to sterilize the entire environment. The air, the tools, the surgeon's hands, the bandages, everything in that space had to be chemically treated to kill the invisible enemy.
It's just amazing when you stack it all up like that.
It really is.
I wanted to take a step back now and just look at this infographic as a whole again. We've unpacked the individual names, but let's look at that trajectory.
Sure.
We start in 550 BC. The goal is survival. The method is a simple cloth. We end with Lister in the 1870s. The goal is still survival, but the method is this comprehensive system of chemical warfare against bacteria.
It's a fundamental shift from a passive defense to an aggressive one.
Explain that.
Well, the Greeks were passive. I hope this cloth stops the dirt from getting in. Hippocrates was slightly more active. I'll wash this with some wine. But Lister was fully aggressive. I am going to actively seek out and destroy anything in this space that could possibly cause an infection.
And what's so fascinating is that each step was absolutely necessary. You couldn't have Lister without Pasteur.
No, impossible. Lister needed the germ theory to know what to kill. If he didn't know about airborne germs, he wouldn't have thought to spray the air with acid.
And you couldn't have had Pasteur without Leeuwenhoek.
Right. Pasteur needed the microscope to prove that the germs actually existed. You can't build a theory about something you can't see or detect.
And in a way, you couldn't have had Semmelweis without the terrible tragedy of the Vienna hospitals to spur him on to collect that data.
It's a cascade. A slow, painful, centuries-long cascade of knowledge. And think about the time gaps. This is what always blows my mind when I look at this. 550 BC to Hippocrates. A couple of centuries.
Okay.
But then Hippocrates to Leeuwenhoek. 2,000 years. 2 millennia of relative stagnation where we were just guessing and using intuition.
And then Leeuwenhoek to Semmelweis is another 200 years of having the tool to see the bugs, but not connecting them to disease.
Right, just ignoring them. But then, look at the end of the timeline. Semmelweis, Pasteur, Lister. That all happens within a few short decades in the 19th century.
The acceleration of knowledge, it's like a snowball rolling downhill.
Once we had the tool, the microscope, and the right mindset, the scientific method, things moved incredibly fast. That's the real aha moment for me. The bottleneck wasn't human intelligence. Hippocrates was the genius. The bottleneck was visibility. As soon as we could see the problem, we solved it relatively quickly.
That's a powerful thought. It took 2,000 years to invent the flashlight, but only a few decades to clean the room once the light was on.
A perfect way to put it. We can only fix what we can perceive.
So, today, when we walk into a modern hospital and we see the pristine white floors, the surgeons scrubbing in for minutes on end, the sterile packaging on every single instrument, we are looking at the direct legacy of this timeline.
Every single part of it. Every time a surgeon washes their hands, they are channeling Semmelweis. Every time a nurse wipes down a surface with disinfectant, that's Lister. Every time a lab tech looks at a culture under a microscope, that's Pasteur and Leeuwenhoek.
And every time they put a sterile bandage on at the very end.
That's the ancient Greeks and their simple piece of cloth.
It's all layered on top of each other. We didn't throw away the cloth, we just added the acid and the soap and the science to it.
Safety isn't a single invention. It's a sediment. It's layers and layers of lessons, most of them learned the hard way, through millions of lives lost.
Well, this has been a fascinating journey through what looked like a very short list of names, from the battlefields of ancient Greece to the misty, acid-filled rooms of Victorian England.
It's the story of how we stopped letting the invisible kill us.
Before we wrap up, I want to ask you for a final thought. We've looked back at this evolution. What does this make you think about for the future?
You know, it brings me right back to that idea of visibility. The microscope changed everything because it revealed a threat that was right there in front of our faces the whole time, but it was just too small for us to see. It makes me wonder, what is our modern invisible threat? What are we currently treating like the Greeks treated wounds, just with intuition and guesswork, because we don't have the right tool to see it yet?
That's a scary question.
It is. Is it something like microplastics in our blood? We know they're there, just like Leeuwenhoek knew the animalcules were there, but we don't really understand what they're doing to us yet. Is it the long-term impact of algorithms on our social fabric and our mental health?
Right.
Is it something like chronic inflammation, which we know is a factor in so many diseases, but can't fully explain? What is the thing that is harming us today that 100 years from now, people will look back at us and say, I can't believe they didn't see that. It was so obvious. It was right there.
They'll look at us the way we look at the doctors who went from an autopsy to a delivery without washing their hands.
Exactly. I can't believe they ate that, or I can't believe they used that material and everything. The timeline isn't finished. We are just the current entry on it, fighting our own invisible wars.
Well, on that slightly unsettling note, something to keep you up at night, we will wrap up this deep dive. Thank you for walking us through the evolution of safety.
My pleasure. It was fascinating.
And thank you to everyone listening. Keep asking questions. Keep looking for the invisible. We'll see you in the next deep dive.